Hello.
Good morning, Kim. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. How's my boy?
Good. He's honest today. He's been making fun of me today, so he's here.
Uh-oh. What's he
He's
been making fun of you
good old
about?
self. So my son wasn't feeling good, and I had to go pick him up from school. So that's why I'm running late this morning.
Hmm.
And I didn't brush my teeth before I got out the door to go get him. And Eric's like, "God, aren't you going to brush your teeth?" And I'm like,
Oh,
"Uh-huh, when I get home." So
that's
he's
funny.
like making fun of me. So I'm clean. I'm good. I'm ready.
Awesome. All right, Eric, we're going to talk about something that I think you brought up before, mind, body, and spirit. When and why, when and why not balanced or one is not well. When and why they're not balanced, there's a component, or one of them is not well. What does it look like in each case, and what can we do in each case? Like, what if the mind is off, but or the spirit's off, and the mind and body are fine, or just talk about the balance between those three roommates: the mind, the body, and the spirit, and what it looks like when it's not in balance, and what we can do about it.
He says, well, most definitely, just like you said, Mom, they have to be roommates. They have to be friends. They have to be, he's showing them like working synergistically.
Mm-hmm.
He says you can't spend time working on one, making sure it's all good and shit, and neglecting the rest.
Yeah.
He said, if your mental health is great, that's great, but don't neglect your physical self and your spiritual self. Um, One affects the other, affects the other, affects the other. So make sure you spend equal amounts of time, he says, on all three. He says, when you neglect one, actually, he didn't say when you neglect one. He said when you fuck it up.
Yeah, that's more
um,
like him.
this is what it, yeah, this is what it looks like. And he's showing me this image of, he's showing like mind, body, and spirit, and he's showing me what it looks like if you've neglected body, physical body, like energetically, and it literally looks like darkness. I still see like these little molecules moving and buzzing around, but it's like they're confused. They don't know where to go. It's like basically what he's saying is the body doesn't know how to talk to itself.
Okay.
When the others aren't working together, when they're not in line with each other. He says, but he says, I don't understand, Mom. He says, so many people work on their spiritual self, he's like, people are tripping out nowadays over, oh, I'm awakening, I'm spiritual now, this is great. And they spend all this time on their spiritual self, but they forget about their physical self or even their mental self.
Yeah.
He says that they even, he's saying, he's kind of like really disheartened with his tone of voice. He kind of shakes his head and he's like, but it's weird because people even like reject their bodies or like neglect themselves, their physical body, because they think it makes them more spiritual, more connected to their spiritual
Really?
self or spiritual body. That's
Okay.
just about as fucked up as it gets, Mom, he
I
says.
guess. You just love doing that,
So,
don't you?
oh, I tell you what. But he says you have to stay connected to all three to keep your full sense of awareness in line and in a place where you can contribute to your own expansion. And then he kind of says, he's like pointing, he says, but understand that contribution, you're contributing also to the whole, like the collective consciousness of all of mankind. So what you do to yourself, you're not just doing to yourself. He says, and then now he's kind of shifting to talking about mental health. You can't just sweep it under the rug. You can't run away from yourself. If you're going through some mental things, some mental, emotional imbalances or whatever, if you just continue to sweep it under the rug and you think that you're hiding from yourself, you just become it that much more. And he's just reminding people, he says, be careful because you are contributing to all that is, something even bigger than yourself. So it starts
True.
on the personal level, expands to the whole. And when we self-mutilate or self-destruct on a personal level, it creates a ripple effect too, Mom,
Sure, we're
he
part of the
says.
collective.
he's talking about everything starts on the spiritual level as energy and manifests physically. Now he says, we all know this. We've heard it a million times. He says, "What you give energy to, you become. You manifest." But the trip is, Mom. He says the trip is people also think that if they sweep it under the rug, if they hide it, then they're not it. They think that they're moving away from it. But essentially, they stuff it down. They keep it there. He says, and it's just the same as he says when you run from it or when you think you're hiding from it, you're actually it. It's more of a matter of surrender, Mom. If you want to bring all three, mind, body, and spirit, in balance, surrender what doesn't serve you on each level.
For example,
but this takes a lot of he said this takes a lot of deep emotional honesty and personal research, he says.
Okay.
So for example, let's say you are battling with mental illness. Maybe you suffer from paranoia. Mm-hmm. First, you have to emotionally research yourself and ask yourself those questions at the mental level. Why you're paranoid, what fears this brings about. He says you have to look at every perspective, every dynamic, every angle. And when you can first see it, you assert it, he says, then is when you have to find the strength in yourself to surrender to it. It's different though, Mom. It's not accepting it, he says. It's not like saying, I accept this is who I am. Because then you begin to bring it in, host it, honor it, manifest it even more. Oh. Surrender is different. Surrender is not aligning with it.
It's hard. It's so hard. Surrendering is the hardest thing for me anyway. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
It is. It is, but it can be powerful too when you can finally get there in that sacred spot. But he says, when you surrender to something, you're not accepting it and you're not rejecting it. You simply just acknowledge. And he just shows like energy moving past, like the essence of you acknowledging paranoia. I see it, it's there, and I just move past it. You don't align with it and you don't reject it, he says. Either one, he says, will fuck you up. If you align with it, obviously. Yep, that's me. Or if you reject it, say, no, not me. I don't want that.
Yeah, right.
Then you essentially become it. Yeah. But if you just at least can acknowledge it, you too can separate from it.
Okay.
He says he's talking about okay, so this gets real deep. He's talking about, because he's like started talking about how people treat their bodies like shit. Mm-hmm. But they think, well, just this one time, this won't hurt if I eat this or if I do that. And he's like, well, how many just one times have you had?
I've had a lot of those. I'm dipping into the Halloween candy already.
I know. I'm dreading that. But he says, consistency is what keeps you at a higher vibrational frequency. Consistency with your physical health, your mental health, and your spiritual health.
So hard.
If we keep going like this, Mom, this is what we'll keep experiencing. Yeah. He says, it's miserable. And just like he says, one affects the other. So if you're doing this with your physical health, your mental health, you're going to be emotional up and down, he says. So it's important to first, understand that all three are just as important as each other. And then he starts talking about, I said, well, can't you manifest health by starting spiritually? And the body sort of aligns with, he says, yes, but it takes deep trust, like deep awareness and trust. This is, again, where he's bringing in and talking about, he says it takes a really deep level of consciousness, like actual consciousness, to realize. He just kind of gets this real like shit-eating grin like this. And he said, you're not what you think you are. So but in that, he says, you start with the vibrational self and bringing yourself to awareness of your energy body first.
Ah.
And he says, pay attention to where consciousness goes with your energy body, because that frequency, that vibrational makeup, he says, ultimately will manifest and contribute to your physical health. But because you're human, it takes physicality too. It takes doing.
Yeah.
Just as much as being. You can't neglect that. You can't get away from it, he says. He says, Mom, the trick is, this is just a random thing that he said. He said, the trick is getting people to realize that they aren't what they think, and getting people to realize that they don't have to believe their own thoughts, either about mankind or society or even themselves, he says. Because people think something, they believe it, they experience it, they become it.
Yeah. Well, what about the spirit?
And he just,
I want to talk, when you get to a stopping place, I want to talk about the spirit component, the spiritual component. We've talked a lot about the mind and the body, but what happens if the spiritual component is not, doing too well, and what we can do about it. But go ahead and finish what you're saying.
he's just kind of rambling about basically showing how it comes full circle, like one affects the other. He says, with the spiritual body, Mom, if people neglect it, and in this, he wants to make this clear. He says, this has nothing to do with atheism, people. He says, just so you know. He says, if you neglect your spiritual self.
I didn't even know what that looks like. What does it mean, neglecting your spiritual self?
Yeah, and he says, like, not even neglecting your spiritual self, but not even being in touch with your spiritual side. These are people, Mom, that need things. These are people that you see really, they're egocentric in their thoughts, their beliefs, where they need things to be happy. They need material, money types of objects. This is being less associated, he says, with your spiritual self. And when there's a lack of awareness here, because it's not like there's a lack of spiritual body, he says, it's just a lack of conscious connection. These are the people that continually have illness, physical illness, Mom. He says these are people that basically what he's showing me is those people that you're like, oh, they're such a lost soul. Like, then he goes like me. Like trying this and then trying, like having all kinds of different jobs and it being very fleeting as far as fulfillment. He says, when that happens, when you see these people, he keeps going like this. He says, you can see it in their eyes. Yeah. When they have, he says, but it's hard, Mom, because people, he says, ego and the understanding of what it is, he says, it's probably one of the most misunderstood things. That by understanding it, you can change your life. And he says, when these people reside more in ego, that's when you see these lost souls. That's when you see people that continually have illness because they haven't found that sacred inner space that has nothing to do with ego. That's when you see mind, body, and spirit. He says, Mom, when you get to that sacred inner spot, he's like showing this little golden nugget like inside the heart. He says, when you get to that spot, you bring your awareness there and you consciously connect. It's more of a everything else sort of naturally falls away. He's like showing all these layers just falling off. And you naturally become your authentic self. You naturally become a higher vibrational frequency, Mom, which in tune, if he's like, the higher your vibration, the less likely illness. Oh, there's so much that goes into this too, and then the mind comes in too. But the less likely the physical illness you experience. But then the mind, he says, if you can control the mind and not become a slave to your own thoughts, you can live a life of peace. But there's all these people out there like, oh, I can't make my mind shut up, he says. As long as you believe that you can't make it shut up, you'll experience that you can't make it shut up.
Yeah.
He says.
So, what can you do to make the spiritual self healthy and whole? Because I don't know what a lot of people might not even know what I'm talking about when I say the spiritual self.
That's right. Um, he goes, go ahead, Kim, give her the example that you just experienced this morning. So there's definitely times where I feel really impulsive and I'm like, oh, I need to buy that.
Yeah.
And this morning was one of those. I came across something I'd never seen before. It's called a UFO drum. It sounds amazing. It's for sound therapy, sound
Oh, okay.
healing. I was like, oh my gosh, I need that right now, but it's really expensive. And I almost bought it. But then I had to ground myself and say, okay, I'm in ego because I think I need this
Mm.
to be happy or for healing or whatever. So it's really a matter, he says, of being aware of your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
where they're coming from. Because I was very impulsive in that moment, but I was like, okay, this is ego saying I need this.
Yeah.
So I had to separate from that. Now I still really want it, but I don't need it.
Okay.
So the difference, he says, the difference is, when you find yourself looking outside for health, happiness, joy, peace, that's when there's a lack of connection to the spiritual body, the spiritual.
So, the spiritual
Um,
body, making that healthy is like being your true, authentic self. Um, what do we do to get our spiritual body healthy?
he says, Mom, to get all three on the same page in good shape, he says, honor your true self every moment you can.
Yeah.
Be mindful in that. I'm doing this because, I love myself or whatever. He says, the more that you can allow yourself to be yourself, um, the more you're going to nurture all three. But when you begin to believe others' thoughts of you, others'
Yeah.
ideas, other concepts, even your own negative thoughts about yourself, you do damage to all three.
Sure.
So he says it's very simple, Mom, but it's very complex because we're not used to simplicity. We're used to having to break things apart, he says, and analyze and overthink things. He says it's just as simple as saying, I'm just gonna be. I'm just gonna
Okay.
be.
Well, that's a good place to end
But
off, I think.
yeah, he says a lot of people have a hard time just being. They think they have to do.
Or have. There's being, there's doing, and
He's,
there's having.
yeah, he said, you just said do. He's making fun of
Oh
me.
my gosh, Eric, how old are you? Anyway, all right. Well, I want to remind you guys, or let you guys know, that if you look at the information that is going to follow, we have changed the city, the tour cities. We've taken some away and added some, including Columbus, Houston, where we're going to hang out in my house, Eric's old stomping ground since he was like 18 months old. And we're going to do all sorts of amazing stuff. We're also going to go to Brisbane, Australia, and Edinburgh, Scotland. So exciting! Also, if you guys do not have our Channeling Eric mobile app, go get it. It's free for Android and for iPhone. So if you want all content in one easy spot and you want to be notified when a new YouTube comes out, etc., get it. Don't cost a thing.
That's right. It's easy to use. Yep, and it's easy to use. I love it.
It is. All right. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Eric. Eric, I love you so much.
You're welcome. Says I
Bye.
love you, Mom.
Oh, I know. Bye bye.